10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 177. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 177 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Hope you've all had a great week. Thank you so much for joining us again this Friday. We've got a great episode for you, and we really appreciate you tuning in each and every week. If you're brand new to the show, which is very possible, my name is Nick Manella. I'm the creator and host of this podcast, and what we try to do every week is just give you something to think about, work on, or if you're not ready to work on this stuff, we give you something to file away for a later date, and always have some material so that you never have an excuse not to be practicing. I think that's the biggest thing. So if you don't know, you can get a PDF for each and every episode that we've ever done, all 177 episodes of the show, by going over to our Patreon page and choosing to support us through the form of a $3 donation every month. That gets you discounts on a lot of the products in our store. It gets you that free PDF every single week. And it's just a great way to support the show and make sure that it keeps coming at you every week in high quality. So we've got some new people this week that have signed up. Got to do a major shout out to them. So thank you to Josettu. Thank you to Vincent. We also have to give a shout out to Michael and Peter. Thank you guys so much for joining up to support the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, become part of the family, and get your hands on all those educational materials. All right, let's jump into today's episode. Today is going to be a fun one over a great Thelonious Monk composition called I Mean You. This is one of my favorite Monk tunes, and we're going to talk about phrasing over this particular tune of the month. We've got some lessons on phrasing prepared for you, and of course, every month we put out a full-length etude, so we've got that for you as well. So, I Mean You is a classic Monk tune, meaning that it's fairly traditional, it's fairly easy to figure out what's going on, but it has those classic sort of Monkisms in the chord progression that makes it just, in my opinion, more interesting than a lot of other tunes. So, first of all, this is usually played as a medium or an upswing tune. It's AABA, which makes it pretty easy to follow, and it's your traditional 32-bar tune. So let's talk about the A sections, what's happening with these. So this is an interesting one. So it starts in the key of concert F, does that for 2 bars, and then he has this really interesting progression that I think is very monkish, where he goes to the flat 6 in bar 3, a flat 6 dominant 7th chord, and then he goes to the 6 dominant 7, and then it's just a 2-5-1. So the interesting part here is that flat 6 chord in bar 3. I think that's what makes this tune kind of stand out. And then the only other thing that's happening here is the bridge. So all of those A sections are basically exactly the same. Very easy to hear what's going on once you get used to this. The bridge is an interesting one. He goes to the flat 7 dominant chord and then resolves that to the 1. That's a really interesting sound. And then what he does in the second half of the bridge is he goes to that flat 6 dominant 7 chord again. And then to bring it back into the A section, instead of doing just a regular 5 chord, he actually does the tritone sub, meaning that that's actually part of the tune. So instead of going to a concert C, he goes to a concert F sharp 7 chord, and that brings us back into the concert F chord by way of a half step, which is really just a tritone substitution of the 5. And then we're back into the last A section. So there's a quick overview of the chord structure of this particular tune. Now let's get into what we actually want to cover using this tune as our vehicle. So the reason that I chose this tune as a vehicle for this particular lesson, not only do I love this tune, but it has these really spread out chord changes, meaning that there's not really ever, with the exception of one measure, 2 chord changes in one measure. So this allows us to think about something. I think what happens is when we have a tune like this with changes, spaced out such as this one, we have a tendency to play from chord to chord, meaning that sometimes our phrases are going to be confined to one chord change, and we have a lot of trouble actually playing across where the chord changes, right? So, and this is kind of the hardest part about jazz improvisation, is playing from bar to bar when the chord actually changes with a line that sort of adapts to the chord change as it goes through. So what results from this is that we have all these self-contained little phrases, and you could start to be a little bit too predictable in terms of, okay, I rest right before the chord changes every time. And if you listen to people play, including myself at various intervals throughout my career, you would hear that. And you would almost start to, by like the time, let's say my second or third chorus of my solo came around, you'd almost be able to predict where I'm going to start and stop my phrases. So we want to kind of break out of that and start playing not only across the bar line, but across bar lines where the chord actually changes. So that's what we're going to look at in this. So I've used as my first example the first four measures, because this is a very, very easy place to fall into this trap that we were talking about. So what we'll typically do is we'll play like a two-measure phrase, and at the end of the second phrase, at the end of the second measure of the F chord, we'll rest. And then we'll play around a one-bar phrase over that concert D-flat 7 chord. And then we'll play another around one-bar phrase. We'll mostly fill up the measure on that D7 chord. And that's the way that we're thinking about this. So it's like these three self-contained little phrases. So this is the first example on the PDF. What I've done is maybe a typical phrase that you might play if you're not thinking about it. So let's listen to that first, and I think you'll recognize this. This might actually sound familiar to your playing if this is a trap that you get into. So here's a typical phrase that, you or I might play over the first four bars. So that was example number 1 on your PDF. Now, I want you to understand there's nothing inherently wrong with that phrase, right? Like, I'll play phrases like that all the time. But what I don't want to do is be stuck playing a phrase like that because I can't do anything else. So here is an example of the same four measures, but now I'm playing across the chord change point. And that's the whole thing. So when you look at this visually on the PDF, you'll see it's like the phrases are kind of the same length, but you'll notice that they're just kind of like shifted over so that I'm playing across the bar line. That's tough to understand without seeing it. But when you listen to it, understand and listen for myself playing over that bar line change. That's really what I'm going for here. So here's kind of the new and improved phrase that plays over the chord change. So you can hear I'm definitely playing over the point with which the chord changes. And it does change my phrasing a little bit. It gets me to play in different parts of the measure, gets me to rethink my phrases a little bit. Man, that's kind of the whole goal of this. All right, so the second two examples before we get into the actual etude, this is over bars 3, 4, 5, and 6, because I think that this is particularly a place where we tend to do this. It's that flat 6 dominant 7th chord into 6 dominant 7 into the 2, 5. And I think this is a particular place I know for myself where I have a real tendency to split things up and, keep them inside one measure. And I'm really trying to be able to play not only over the bar line, but over the chord change. So again, this is example number 3 on your PDF. And here's an example of a typical phrase that's sort of self-contained to each chord. So again, nothing inherently wrong with that phrase. Don't get me wrong here. But if our goal is to be able to play over these chord changes, we want to shift our phrase to something that's going to sound like this next example. And again, it's interesting to look at visually because you'll see that the phrases start in odd places in the measure, or what you might perceive to be odd places in the measure. But this is the kind of flexibility that I would like you to develop, is to be able to start a phrase anywhere in the measure, and then when the chord changes, not to get tripped up, to be able to just continue your line until it makes sense to stop it and start a new phrase. All right, so here's the final example of the phrases going over the bar line in this section of the tune. And this kind of stuff is a perfect example of where like studying the phrasing of the masters really, really helps. And I'll probably make an episode about that maybe next month on the lick of the month. We'll talk about phrasing instead of notes, because we talk about notes a lot on this show, and we need to change that. We need to get into phrasing a little bit more, because as we all know, phrasing is much more important than notes. You know, probably 10 times more important than the actual notes you're choosing to play, is how you're going to play those notes. And you can make some boring, quote unquote boring notes sound really good if you phrase them correctly. So we're going to talk more about this, but this is kind of the starting point. So let me know if you have any questions on this, if what I'm trying to present to you makes sense or not, because this can be kind of a confusing topic if you're not sure why I'm presenting this to you. So hopefully I was clear. And now what we're going to do is get into the etude. And this is an entire chorus of I Mean You. And I've been thinking about starting the phrases in interesting places all the way through this and playing across almost every chord change that happens, with a few exceptions. So really listen for that. Make sure you grab it. We do have it in every key. We've got it in concert, B flat, E flat, and bass clef on Patreon. So this is going to be something you'll want to get your hands on. Let me know if you have any questions, comments. Leave those in the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group. Join up today and join a bunch of other folks that are discussing, leaving themselves playing for review, asking for advice, all kinds of different things happening over there. So come and join us. Come and join us in that group. We'd love to have you. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you to all the new Patreon members. Thank you to all the old Patreon members. We really, really super appreciate you. And thank you to anybody out there that listens on a consistent basis. We love making these shows for you and hope they're giving you as much benefit as we're trying for. All right, have a great weekend. We'll see you next week with some brand new episodes, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.